When do you head back east?
Tomorrow. I'm trying to leave at 11 and get back at like 8.
All right, 1:30 panels off of revenue stream. So, okay, if you're here for that one, you're in the right spot. If not, okay, pass off for it.
Leave now while you've got the chance.
No one will be offended.
All right, folks. Hello. Are you having a good couple of days so far? Learning loads. Yeah. It's nice to see we've drilled down to the finest clients so far. Cream of the crop. That's what I like to see. So what I'll do in a moment, I'll briefly introduce myself and hand over to Ruth as well. But first of all, I just want to say we want to try and make this a little bit different maybe to some of the sessions you've been into before. We want to make this more practical takeaway elements that you can apply to any sport in most situations related to youth and amateur sport. So hopefully it'll be a good toolkit to take away and use for you as well. For those of you who I've not met, my name's Graham Oliphant. I have a confession, I'm not from North America, let's put it out there. I'm from England originally, based in Seattle now, and I work with the Seattle Seawolves, who are a professional rugby franchise based in Seattle, who also happen to win the Major League Rugby Championship this year. Very good. Well done, yeah. Oh yeah. I'm also working with USA Rugby around organising some corporate events as well as amateur rugby events. So part of this is relevant, and I'll use some examples, but it's about also looking at how you can develop a relatively new sport in a new audience and make it relevant. And this is something that you guys can take away and apply to your areas as well. So that's myself, joined by Ruth, who some of you may have met in previous sessions, and I'll let Ruth introduce herself as well.
Hi, I'm Ruth Nicholson. I'm the founder of Go, which is a training and resource site for youth sports clubs. So the span that we're going to offer is small revenue streams from everything from grassroots youth clubs up through amateur and semi-pro, sort of that, carving out that spectrum in sport. My background is I'm a professional facilitator and mediator, which means I run meetings and break up fights for a living. It does come in handy when I'm dealing with youth sports parents. I'm also a specialist in organizational development. So my passion is actually helping clubs develop their governance, their boards, their staffing, and their volunteer programs to actually support coaches and players. So I don't do the most glamorous stuff in sport, but I do the stuff that is going to keep your club alive. So with that,
awesome, yeah.
Let's jump in.
So just to give you a headline, 3 is a number you want to remember at the start. You have 3 sections. First of all, how we get started, what things we need to put in place. Number 2, the funding sources, which is going to be the main bulk of our discussion. And then finally, number 3, we'll look at how you sustain that growth and propel forward with a plan going ahead. And within the middle belly of that, the funding sources, we'll look at 5 main key elements of funding that are useful and practical and accessible that you can all look at as well. So first of all, getting started. If we think in terms of youth organisations, amateur setups, as opposed to collegiate systems and professional sport, first of all you need to define who you are. Okay? And this few elements we're going to discuss now come before you even address what funding you're going to try and get hold of. And one of the big things, I'll hand over to Ruth now, is in defining who you are, it's also a question of understanding the audience as well. And what in your experience have you found with dealing with youth organisations especially, that has become quite prevalent?
I think having a sense of who you're serving and what you're trying to accomplish, and you know, the corny bits about mission and vision and values and strategic plans, it doesn't have to take hours and hours and hours. I've got clients that we've done mission, vision, values, and strategic plan in 4 hours. But that clarity of who you are and who you want your athletes to become is really critical, because without that, there's no direction. It's sort of, you know, is it Lewis Carroll? You know, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't really matter how you get there. And the other is, once you've figured out who you are and what you want to accomplish, then you can plug in people to the roles that need to happen to make that happen. In my work, I work with clubs, and we work, it's the number 3. You're going to get a lot of 3s and 5s today. The 3 legs of the stool that I work with are coaching in the sport, the expertise in whatever sport it is that's your passion, the governance, the board of directors or the owners, the folks who are on the hook for the finances and the human resources and the legal stuff. And the 3rd leg of the stool is operations and administration, that boring bureaucratic stuff. But if your shirts don't match, it's going to be hard to play on Saturday, and if you don't have ice time or field time or pool time, your athletes don't get to participate. Those 3 things need to be in balance. The great thing is, once you've figured out sort of the mission, vision, what you want to accomplish, you can then plug people into those functional areas. Notice I didn't say parents, because they can play in all 3 functional areas. But you plug them in where their talents fit the best. So if you've got somebody who's the grand doer of all time, give them a project, it gets done. You want them in operations and administration, because stuff's going to get done. If you want that big picture thinker, I plan and I put it together, maybe they belong more in governance and big picture stuff, and not in that detailed day-to-day stuff. So putting that together and clarifying those expectations sets you up then to go after the revenue sources you want. You get the right people in the right place with the right expectations and the right skill set match. You know, is your PR person your best marketer and salesperson? Yeah, maybe, maybe not.
And that's quite important, isn't it, is getting that skills match. Understanding, first of all, what the roles are to be filled, and then looking at your pool of people. And it's particularly relevant when we look at a youth sport organisation or amateur, where most of the people are volunteers, they're not paid, so therefore they're not professionals. So you have to be box quite clever in matching people up with the right roles, first of all, that they're willing to do and that they match. And as we see, when we come on to identifying where we can acquire funding sources with, this becomes even more important as well, doesn't it? Also, when we look at, you mentioned there about having a plan, looking at where you fit in the market as well, and what audience you're trying to attract. What's your experience with dealing with clubs in terms of helping them adjust to a budget and a profit and loss understanding as well?
All over the map. I'm not convinced that folks are actually adept at budgeting at the youth game. It's more about, you know, they'll worry about, do we have enough money coming in to cover expenses, but it's not always really strategic about what do we plan to spend on these categories. And it's, I mean, the biggest budget line items for most youth clubs are coaches, if you pay your coaches, and fields and facilities, ice time or pool time or grass time. And a lot of times it's reactionary. Well, we spent, you know, $50,000 on fields last year. We think that's what we'll spend again. And then, you know, the local parks department raises their rates and you have an uh-oh moment, but there's not necessarily a contingency plan of, well, what happens if fields get pulled out of circulation for maintenance. Puyallup School District this last year pulled like 23 fields out of circulation over the summer for maintenance. and the lacrosse folks and the soccer folks and everybody was going, huh? And then the county pulled another 2 fields out because they were converting them to turf. Well, now the good news is they're gonna have 2 new lighted turf fields. The bad news is that was on top of the school district pulling almost half of its fields out of circulation. I don't know how people played sport in Puyallup this past summer. A lot of sharing going on. So understanding, how to balance your income and your expenditures, a lot of folks are still flying seat of the pants. And then all of a sudden the fees are raised, or coaches are furloughed. I had one club took a budget hit. They went to other coaches and cut their salaries 20% overnight. It was a really miserable board meeting. The only good part of it was the coaching director cut his salary by 25% before he docked his coaches.
It's interesting, so there's quite a little bit of complexity involved there as well, isn't there? And you mentioned about the acquiring the pitches and the availability, which becomes more and more challenging when you've got so many competing sports, all trying to aim for those optimal windows of time, particularly on the weekends, Thursday, Friday night evenings. So coming on to that then, as part of your original planning stage, where we get all our ducks in a row, we get the right people for the right roles, venue agreement therefore becomes critical at this stage before you start to source funding. Venue agreement makes up a large proportion of your costs. So if you understand your costs first of all, then you know your starting point. So have you got any experience with the people you're dealing with where venue agreement, and how do people go about establishing an agreement with a venue?
You have more flexibility with private fields and private schools than you do with government agencies. A lot of times government agencies will just say, this is the way it works, and you get the rules of using their facilities. And you find that then you have to adapt in terms of, for training space, how many teams are you going to put on a field? In Seattle, you're not going to put one soccer team on one field for a practice. It's not going to happen. I don't think it happens for lacrosse or rugby either. You're sharing fields, you've got kind of odd times. And on the other side, they're going to want assurances in terms of how you get billed. Do you pay them before you use the field space? Do you pay them afterwards? If you decide you don't need a field, can you cancel that use and get a refund? Or do you have to cancel within traditionally with Seattle parks, if you didn't cancel 2 weeks ahead of time, you're paying for the field whether you used it or not. So all of a sudden you've got to be working with your coaches about planning your activities and your calendar out at least 3 weeks ahead of time, preferably longer. In Pierce County, there are places that you submit your requests for field use once a year. You're projecting daily field use for an entire year ahead of where you are. And in some cases, you're paying for on-site staff, whether it's janitorial support or security. That's going to be in your field permits, and you're going to have to show proof of insurance. So however your club, your sport does insurance, whether it's through the club, your affiliation through an association at the state level or the national level, in this country you're not getting venues unless you've got an insurance certificate. And often it has to be named insured. And so factoring that into the time you need to come up with those agreements and those contracts. As a venue, as a scheduler, helping your coaches, who often have a shorter planning horizon than a field scheduler, and helping your board understand that you've got to leave enough lag time to get all that stuff done. That it's not just about getting the venue agreement, it's are you going to get it in time so your teams can start practicing before a summer tournament season or a fall league season or whatever that deadline is, and giving yourself that planning time. In volunteer organizations, folks are often a little more last minute, and the bureaucracies don't budge.
And I suppose some of this as well comes into the fact we should mention at this stage is how you set yourself up. Most youth clubs are set up as not-for-profit. And that's a consideration at the very beginning, because that can have a big impact on your finances and how you manage those finances. And if we think back to the roles, assigning the roles at the beginning, if you haven't within your group got someone with sufficient tax knowledge, this is the stage where you assess and decide, okay, one or two of these aspects are more specific, we can outsource this. And I would always advise you to do with tax. If you're involved with that, outsource that one. Take it off your plate, and you know that you're covered. Likewise, if there's specific legal matters, outsource that as well, so you're covered. And you can focus on your core activity then, which is establishing a solid foundation and then growing and layering the growth as you go as well. Yeah. So just finishing on the venue agreement, and then we'll look at some of the funding sources. Part of the actual venue agreement is similar to one or two of the funding sources we'll see, is also understanding what encompasses that venue agreement as well, because sometimes that can tie up both your food and beverage, your opportunity to sell alcohol if that's feasible, depending what you're looking at, even down to merchandising and parking opportunities as well. Some venues have that locked in with providers already assigned, which therefore limits what you can do. So hence more the reason why when you're having that discussion with the venue, it should be an ongoing discussion, not just a one-off meeting and then you lock in an agreement. Because once you commit to that agreement, that's you fixed then for potentially the next 3, 4, 5 seasons. So that's quite important as well, right?
The first thing I did, I was scheduling for a local club. I went down to the Parks Department and scheduled the meeting, and it was all about them. I didn't say a word about what I wanted, what I needed, what the club's wishes were. I wanted to understand their system. Turns out they used an accounting system for assigning fields. It was really useful to know that because it's a crazy way to do it. But once I understood how they did their business, I could then formulate my requests in a way that translated to them. That relationship turned out to be really good. It was really bureaucratic. It was really frustrating some days. But I can remember one day, Parks Department calls, it's 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon. We're changing your fields for Tuesday. Really? Got to change the time, got to move all your practices from this time to this time. That happened to hit 10 of my 6 and 7-year-old soccer teams. And they were supposed to practice at 5 o'clock, they were moving it back to 4:30 at a different field. Because of the field shortage in Seattle, that's 10 teams I'm moving on less than 24 hours notice. If you're a parent, you're now hyperventilating, and I am not your favorite person, right? And they had the right to do it under our venue agreement. I had zero leverage. I said, well, John, okay, let me think about this. Okay, so let's see, 10 teams, and that's this many kids, and that's about this many parents. And so, okay, well, I can do the telephone tree here and the email here, and we can get out to, it was like 260 families. He says, you have to contact 260 families? I said, yeah, that's because I have 10 teams on this really huge field, and we now got to change that, and I'm just thinking through what's got to happen. Our relationship was so good. Okay, and I was full of a little malarkey. He says, I can't do that to you. Well, of course he could do that to me. He says, I'll get somebody else to move. We didn't have to. So that relationship saved a ton of heartache inside my club, and he didn't have to be that nice to me. So that relationship, even with the agreements, is gold. Sometimes you don't get that lucky, but God damn.
Absolutely. And that's key, I think, through these 2 days. It's something to bear in mind. And we'll touch on it later, but in all the talk of data analysis, social media traffic, how to market, how to sell tickets, never underestimate that you can't beat the face-to-face relationship, and that should always try and form a cornerstone of starting a relationship, which you can then follow up with email, social media traffic and the like. But if you've made the effort to go and speak to someone, especially someone like a venue owner, people like that, you develop that relationship, and it is a relationship that you will nurture over time, and you will reap the rewards from that, rather than trying to contact them facelessly. So it's well worth bearing in mind. So that's some of the ideas of kind of getting things going, getting started. We've got our plan, we've got our people, we've assigned them the suitable roles. We've knuckled down a real good venue agreement, so we're good to go. Now we've got to pay for it. Where do we get the money from? So we'll discuss 5 main areas, 5 main brackets of revenue. Yeah? So we've got membership fees, we'll look at grants, sponsorship, where's number 4? Members' activities, which encompasses a few out-of-the-box thinking, and match day activity. So they're probably your main 5 groups of income. So we spoke about some of the fixed costs potentially being your field rental and coaching fees. What do we have within terms of membership fees that we can use as a vehicle to get regular income?
So when I think about membership fees, I think of a spectrum from a model where your individual programs and your individual teams are your cost centers. So every one of those little things needs to break even, all the way to the one club budget that has line items. The budget has to be in balance, profit and loss, but individual programs may or may not be in the red or the black. So the idea with program by program or team by team is it's easier to keep track of your costs. It's easier to keep things on track. The danger is people can feel nickeled and dimed. So if I have, okay, I've got a coaching fee, and then I got a uniform fee, and then I got a trainer fee, and then, well, if I want to do that Friday night special training, I got that fee. On one hand, you can keep it so it's in the black. On the other hand, your clients and your parents at some point are going to go, hey, this is adding up. I know some clubs that go on the other end of the spectrum, and they have an all-inclusive annual fee or season fee. And that includes things like their coaching fees, field rental for games and training, referees, overhead club administration for maybe the executive director or the registrar, all the league and tournament fees. It's a big number. Okay, so you're in risk of sticker shock, but it's covered. I actually know one club, one of my boys played with years ago, their uniforms were included in that. I wrote them one honking big check, and that was it for the year. It's easier to manage financial aid if you're doing it on a club level and not a team by team level. So I had one team, 8 kids on financial aid on that team. If they had been their own cost center, that coach wouldn't have made much of a salary. And they had paid coaches in this club. If you budget for financial aid for kids who need help playing, it's easier to do at the organizational level than team by team. There was a caution I picked up. I was doing a course in Wisconsin, and they said, we don't call it scholarship money, we call it financial aid. I said, well, that's getting kind of picky with words. They said, no, for our older kids who were now looking to try to play at the collegiate level, the word scholarship player was causing confusion. So their advice was, if you have kids who need financial aid so they can play, call it financial aid, don't call it scholarship. Thank you, Wisconsin. Membership fees are really how most of the youth clubs get their money. But the second funding source is actually grants. And clubs don't necessarily have a lot of capacity in this, but there's a lot of grant money that goes unused. So my recommendation is that you have a point person for grants, somebody who's good at research, somebody who can write well, and somebody who has a lot of attention to detail. Those are characteristics you want in this person. There are 3 kinds of grant funding sources. There's public and government grants. There are corporate grants, usually corporate foundations attached to a big company, and private foundations. And most of the grant money lives in the private foundation category. And they're typically targeted for specific kinds of use. So think about capital improvement, specific projects or programs, participation fees or scholarships, the financial aid, things for starting up a program or building capacity, operating funds, day-to-day stuff, and endowments. So you got to think about, okay, what kind of money do I need to help make my club work? I've got 4 tips for you in the world of grants. One is make sure your organizational ducks are in a row. People aren't going to give money to organizations that look scrambled, disorganized, okay? So this piece we talked about at the front end is really important. You need to look like you are totally together. Even if you're like a duck and on the surface you're calm and underneath you're paddling like nobody's business. So your nonprofit paperwork, your budgets, your bylaws, you know who's on the board, you have a mission vision thing going, maybe even have a strategic plan. So you can say, we're worth giving money to. Second, know the audience, know the outfit that you're asking to give you money. They've got annual reports you can look up. They've got 990s. Do you know what 990s are? The ugly form, it makes our taxes look good. But nonprofits don't pay taxes, but they fill out a Form 990, which is like a nonprofit tax form. And they've got a list how they spend their money and where they get their money and who they pay. It's a real pain to do. I'd rather do my taxes. But if you know the outfit that you want money from, you need to write your proposal to their guidelines. Even though you may want the money for your reasons, and that's okay. But you're writing a proposal to their guidelines. You're feeding their egos. I just wrote a grant. In fact, I'm supposed to be there this afternoon. We're making a pitch for the grant. I'm here. The GM is there. We're starting a new amateur men's soccer team in Snohomish County. We need help paying our stadium fees, our venue fees. The grant I wrote is for hotel motel tax money. Heads and beds. Now we know why we want the money. We're going to be able to fund 50 to 100% of our stadium rental fees. The pitch my GM is making on the grant I wrote is why all of the opponents in our league are from outside Snohomish County. None of them are in the county. All of them have to travel. So we did a little calculation, how many heads and beds that might be, and he's making the pitch that the calculated number of heads and beds will bring more money into the county than the amount of the grant that we're asking for. And it better work. But it's written because they're all about hotel beds. I found that out through an opposing team owner. Troy told me.
Blame it on Troy.
Blame it on Troy. Right.
What kind of Troy?
Yeah. Our team plays his team, and that's a whole other story. Third tip, look for grants that are beyond your sport. Don't just look for grants that go for soccer or rugby or baseball or whatever your passion is. Think about leadership grants, academics, grants for girls and women's programs, grants for diversity and underserved communities, after-school activities, childhood health and obesity. Sport's a great link with that. Or economic development, like my heads and beds, right? I'm talking economic development for our men's amateur team. And finally, fourth tip, show the results you expect to get because of the money. It's not just because your sport is great, your people are wonderful, and you got the best athletes in town. People who give grants want to see results. And find ways to make that really clear. So in the grant I did for heads and beds, I went to the federal site for travel for federal employees, and they list all of the hotel, the maximum reimbursements for federal employees when they go travel and stay in a hotel. I took that number times the heads and beds I calculated, multiplied that together, came out with a really nice big number. We're asking for about 1/3 of that in grant. So what results do you think you're gonna get? When you're looking for grant resources, think of GuideStar, the Foundation Center online, or Donor Search. That's why this lead person needs to be a bit of a snoop to go find the sources of money, and then figure out how to apply for them and shepherd that process. And that attention to detail is critical when you're writing those proposals, because you're writing them to a certain set of specifications that match the people who are giving away the money. Third funding source, sponsorships. Sponsorships are not fundraising. Write that in big letters in your notes. Sponsorships are not fundraising. Sponsorships are business arrangements. I have something you want, you have something I want. Again, having a person who's the lead, the shepherd, the point person for sponsorships is really key. We've got somebody with our amateur men's team. He's in sales and marketing. It's such a good fit for him. It's such not a good fit for me. I'm a mediator. But Matt is great, and he's got his list, and he's got his thing, and we've got a handout for you that's up here you can pick up afterwards that's a real quick 6-step approach to sponsorships. And the first thing is have a sponsorship lead. The second is back to doing your homework in your organization. Who are your members? Where do they live? What do they like to do? I mean, in addition to playing your sport and watching it. Where do they shop? Where do they go to restaurants? And knowing your geographic area. When I coached years ago, I had a 12-year-old girls soccer team. I was the nanny of one of the girls. That qualified me to coach. But we had a sponsor. We had the local bakery. And it didn't matter if we won or lost. We always went to the Honey Bear Bakery afterwards. That was the local place the kids loved to go after school. And they were our sponsor. They got business out of it. Easy to give a free cookie to a little girl, but you know what? She came with her parents and her older brother and her younger sister. Where do people go? So knowing your membership, what they do, where they like to go, what's available in your geographic area, now you've got some relationships to build on. You know, is it the pizza parlor that kids would like to have birthday parties at? And you can build that relationship because you've got lots of kids in your sports organization, right? The other thing is to think about the equipment you buy. Do you have balls? Do you have nets? Do you have uniforms? What are the supplies you need to run your club? Who provides that? What kind of extra partnership can you get to build on that? And then there are the relationships with where your people work. It's not a sponsorship thing, it's actually a fundraising thing. But there are companies who will match the volunteer hours that volunteers give. And will offer that to your organization too. So where do people work and what are those programs available, particularly in your larger companies? Microsoft is particularly generous about that. So with sponsorships, it's a business relationship. I can provide you access to this demographic of player, this demographic of coach, these neighborhoods that are made up of, 2 parents and 3.4 kids, or whatever those neighborhoods are. And businesses, that's easy access for them. And you're helping them. So sponsorship's a business thing, it's not a fundraising thing. Now I want to caution you as we're going through, because we're going to talk some about fundraising. In the world of staying out of jail, which is a good thing, make sure in your budgeting and your revenue that you're keeping track of where your money is coming from. So if you have money from fees, you want a list of all the money that's come in from your families and fees, and you want a list of anything that's come in from sponsors. You want a list of all your grant money. You may put all of it in one bank account, but you better have records, because one of the biggest hits that youth sports organizations take when they get audited is record keeping. Keeping it in the basement or out in the garage and not being able to find it makes the auditors crazy. But worse, imagine at the end of the year, your budgeting wasn't quite as good as you thought and you have money left. Well, that's kind of cool. Except that it is perfectly legal if we all paid in money as parents and there's money left and the club could refund it to us. That's kind of cool. If we made that money through fundraising, or if we made that money through grants, it's illegal for me to refund that money to you as parents. So it's important to keep those records separate. Hint, hint, spend the grant money first, spend the fundraising money first. So if you do end up with refunds, you're refunding fee money, and that's okay. But if you don't keep those records, you can get yourself sideways with the tax collector. And you don't want to do that. So we are down. I'm just talking. And
You did real well.
talk.
You did real well. This is good. I like this double act. I listen, you talk. This is the way we work. And those were excellent points there. And there's quite a lot of key information in there I just want to pick out to make sure you've got it quite clear. So we covered a couple of things there, the grants and the sponsorship. And the grants fall under fundraising. And I just want you to be real clear that the two are different. Essentially, grants are free money. Sponsorship involves a transaction of some sort, a trade, and often requires a lot more time to bring that together because there's a bit of jostling. Grants are possibly one of the biggest areas, and I'm sure you probably agree, of underutilised money that's just sitting there. If anyone's ever stayed in a hotel, as I do quite often in North America, you see all the taxes that come on afterwards, 2-3%. They all go to sit in a fund for each city to attract economic activity into the normally a 50-mile radius of the city, normally called lodging tax funds, various slightly different names. But essentially, there are people employed, and I go to conferences and speak to them and try and coax the money out of them for sporting events. These people are employed by the city to use that money to give to you as a club or an event organisation to come or to produce something that gives back to the community or raises the economic development of that region as well. And as Ruth was saying there, the key things there are heads in beds. That's kind of the metric that everyone talks about. But if you target other areas, such as childhood obesity, if you're in a youth organisation, after school clubs, and all this information is available on the websites for each city when you download the application. And it comes back to what we were saying earlier about understanding the needs of the people that you're speaking with. Same with when we spoke to the venue, understanding and listening to what they need to get out of the transaction. When you're applying for a grant, take your time and have that specialist learn about the process, make contact, ask the question on the phone, go down to the office and meet the person and say to them, look, this is what we want to do. How can we get the money that you have? What do we need to do? What things do you need to see on the application? And use the same terminology. They're basically giving you the answers to the quiz, listen to them and fill it in appropriately. And then surprisingly enough, without having to give away anything from the club or have a trade, they give you free money. It does exist.
So
It's worth doing.
the grant this afternoon that I'm just totally nervous about, I had done my little analytical thing and counted up how many players per team and which teams were coming and how far they were coming and what that meant. And I didn't count a lot of spectators because I was being really conservative because I didn't want to exaggerate too much. And I came up with a number of heads and beds, and my sports commission in my county said, send it to us and we'll double check your numbers. Because they They help us with social media, they're great. I love my sports commission. And Tammy ran her magic calculator, she tripled my numbers. I said, do you really think we can do that? She says, well, you told me their team's coming from Olympia and the Tri-Cities and Bellingham and 3 people or 2 teams in Pierce County and 2 in Seattle and 1 in Centralia, and yeah. Really? My sports commission made me look really, really good. So instead of breaking even on the grant, it now looks like they're gonna make more money off of us if they give us the money. So, asking for help, my sports commission is great, and it's hotel money for a soccer team.
And if we're thinking that the whole context of this kind of session is understanding how to get sustainable sources of revenue, so if you've already established that relationship, you've got your grant, it may be for 1 year, but guess what, when you go back to have that discussion midway through the year for next year, and you're already hitting those metrics, invite the people along from the city to come to your event, to come to your game. It'd be surprising that relationship is already nurtured, ready for year 2, year 3. And then before you know it, you've got a great regular source of income that will only grow as you grow as well. Again, for free. I'll just put that out there again. Free money. Okay.
There's one more resource I want to give you before we talk a little bit about fundraising and match day. There's a website called independentsector.org. Independentsector.org. And the magic these people do is every year they calculate the value of a volunteer hour across the country and in every state. Now, why would you care? Okay, the first thing is the value of a volunteer hour is always more than minimum wage. And if you have grants that say, how are you going to match this money? What are you going to put into this effort? If you're keeping track of your volunteers, the value of a volunteer hour in the state of Washington is a little over $30 an hour, $30.04 in 2017. So if you have 10 people in your club and they're giving 10 hours a month for like however long, you can run into like a money with a comma in it and nothing flat. You say, our people care so much about this club that they volunteer. I had a tournament, I had $40,000 worth of in-kind labor running that tournament. And don't you know I bragged about that. Independentsector.org. Use that number in your grants to say, we've got dedicated people who are giving us value and we want to match that with you.
So they're 2 really important areas, grants and sponsorship. Understanding the difference as well. Sponsorship, as you probably know, can happen at different levels. You've got multiple levels. So sometimes when we say sponsorship, we think, we've got to approach Amazon directly and ask them for $250,000. But it can start at the very base level, and you've already got a network because you've got club members. Depending on what age group they are, invariably they've still got parents. Parents be of an age where they work in companies. They can access marketing directors, people that hold the purse strings to company budgets. So use the people you know already and build and grow your network, and they in turn become your sponsorship army, your foot soldiers, to help you spread the word. And more so because they're already enfranchised in what you're doing because they're members of the same club. Yeah? And this is where we can also look in terms of future growth later, where we look at using that and making that, propagating that, if you like, even to a larger scale through social media as well, by forming fan groups, having interaction and suggestions that grow the ideals of what you're trying to achieve as well.
You want to talk a little bit about fundraising and match day?
Yeah, sure. So moving on to where are we? Number 4, if you like. So we've had membership fees, grants, sponsorship. Now we're going to look at some members' activities, which also come under fundraising activity. And this can be, again, at different levels. As simplistic as organising a barbecue as a fundraiser. We've got a 50-50 raffle, which is very popular as well, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with. And again, these are all relatively low risk. They're fun. That's the key as well. They're fun. Ingest some fun into the activity, And then in turn you'll attract people. Maybe have themed days at some of the club games. Involve the local sponsors or company businesses that you know that could provide things for either for free or get involved. Think about how by hosting something that's fun, they can also get exposure as well. And who knows, as a result of that, your fundraising activity may develop into a sponsorship opportunity while having that conversation in a nice relaxed environment as well. Just to give you some examples, has anyone ever heard of Hoops Fest? In Spokane? Yeah? Do you know how many teams go there each year, roughly? Too many, yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar, it's been going, I think about 15 years now, and it's 3-on-3 street basketball. They basically take over half the city. There's 7,000 teams attended this year. They have over 3,000 volunteers. And when we link it back to what that brings into the local economy, it's estimated that that one weekend a year for Spokane raises $39 million as a result of that sporting event into the city. So you can imagine writing that application for a grant with those sort of numbers, you know, as it grows. And it becomes this self-propelling beast that is known nationally, and that all originated from a local basketball club that decided to start fundraising and do something outside the box. So these are all things that can be done. You've just got to think a little bit outside of the norm. Membership fees are traditionally always the undercurrent of income, and they can quite often cover off your field rental, potentially your coaching fees as well, as like a base trade. But if you want to grow, the bottom line, you need money. And as we know, a sports business is a business first, and sport is the product. The challenge when you're starting up a new club or an event is that business of sport, it doesn't produce anything. You're kind of selling thin air. You're selling an experience, unlike a company startup. So you have to get creative yourself about how you're going to attract people, make the message compelling, and in turn find sources of funding to sustain yourself and grow. So we've looked at some structured ways there: your membership fees, your grant sponsorship, getting creative with the personnel that you've got to do some activities. And this is where you can also employ technology as well now. Okay, so as we said before, don't overlook the fact that relationship is key, but you can be smart with the use of technology. So for instance now, if we look at amateur clubs, and 1 or 2 amateur rugby teams that I've worked with in the UK now use a white label product. So it's an app that can be bespoke to a club. And when you typically order your tickets online, you can put in on the front end the opportunity for them to pre-order food, pre-order drink, pre-order merchandise. So in a sense, what you're actually doing there, and this obviously is down to your relationship with the venue as well to some degree, is you're capturing that money up front, and potentially you're also upselling products as well to increase that initial $30 for your ticket, maybe to $150, depending on what they buy. So it opens up a whole new thread of opportunities there. Also, if you have a refreshment stand or a bar, if it's applicable, at a game or a club event, most people will pay by cash, right? Or by card, which goes straight to the end user card terminal, right? You gather no information on that person. You're trying to develop a network. You may have the same couple that comes each week to your game, and you never really know who they are because they pay by cash all the time. Using an app such as that, you gather their data, you gather their information as well, which you can then use to grow your network and develop your social media footprint as well. Also, what it does when you've got game days, you've got events, we have this thing called the weather, which kind of getting familiar with now in Seattle as we enter October.
I was going to say,
Well,
it didn't change much from UK, did it?
Pretty much. No, I think the word, they use the word consistent. Consistent rain for 4 months, I think, is in the tagline of Seattle. So you've got to be aware of that, be realistic to it. You know, people won't turn up, it's pouring with rain and it's freezing, but if they've pre-booked things, you know you've got their data, you know you've got that funding, so it alleviates some of that risk factor on the day as well. Yeah. There is a good company, if you want to check it out, called preoday.com, preoday.com, and that's one of the companies that offers this service. You also got a company called fevo.com, F-E-V-O.com. They've got huge link-ups with the Major League Basketball, a few of the big sporting companies as well. And just kind of check out what they do, because it opens up some other thinking. And you don't have to be a professional national organisation to utilise these services. You can use them in a very smart way. And as we said earlier, when we're looking at the limitation of having only a certain number of volunteers who may not necessarily always be specialists in certain roles. If you have a club day, some people aren't particularly customer interfacing, should we say, they're more kind of back office specialists and don't feel comfortable in selling merchandise, selling what you've got on the day. Whereas again, if you've got everything run on an app, it means you can move those people into more appropriate roles for them. You're getting more money into the bank account, alleviating some risk, and the customer experience, if you like, is a little bit smoother, more enjoyable. No one likes queuing for anything. Okay. So that's really interesting. It's worth investigating those and thinking ahead. Have you got any examples from your experiences with that side?
Most of the youth clubs I haven't really been able to capitalize on things other than merchandise sales. The concessions and stuff usually are captured by the venue. I think there's great opportunity, though, to diversify in their revenue streams. So we gave you a glimpse of 5 of them. You don't have to use all 5. But I think in terms of stability of organization, if you can have more than one, if you can have 2 or 3 to level out the hills and valleys, and also to help keep your membership fees down. I mean, pay to play is a real heartache in this country for a lot of sports. And if there are ways to get grants to help with financial aid, to keep your fees down, that really speaks to helping you work long-term in terms of stability.
Sure. I'm just conscious we've only got a few minutes left, so we'll take a couple of questions in a moment. But I just want to re-emphasise the fact that don't overlook the personal relationship to keep running that home. Keep things relevant and present, and all the while, unless I'm mistaken, there's only one weekend in every week, and you're competing for people's time. So it's very easy to get trapped in a bubble because you're ingrained in what you're doing and you think it's the best thing ever. But you need to make that overwhelmingly compelling for someone to bring themselves and their kids to your event, your club that's happening, over and above all the other interests that are going on that weekend, big potential professional franchises, going shopping, taking the kids to the park. So you've got to get your message out there and make it really hit home and resonate. And you do that by understanding your audience and asking them the questions. Do a survey. You know, don't be afraid to ask the questions. What can we do to get you along and keep you involved? And as Ruth was saying there, stability, if we're looking in terms of revenue streams, comes from having multiple sources of ongoing revenue, not just the membership fees, not just one sponsorship. In the same way that we live our lives now, we can't rely just on a pension. You know, we have to diversify ourselves as well. Is there anything else you want to add?
There are 2 handouts. One is the one on sponsorships. The other one looks like this that Nick is going to give you right now. And okay.
Troy?
This is do your action plan and strategic plan in 3 minutes or less. The idea is there's a goal up in the right-hand corner, and that's wherever you want to be with your organization. And the way this is set up is you list all the things that are pushing you towards your goal, and you list all of the speed bumps and things that are in the way of getting to your goal. And the way, after you've done that brainstorm, you do 2 things. 1, you cross everything off that you have no control over. okay? Don't beat your head against that wall. Now, you're gonna have some stuff left that you have control over, and the way you get closer to your goal is you make the good stuff stronger or the bad stuff weaker. And then you pick a handful of things off this sheet and say, for the next month, that's what I'm gonna work on. It's a quick and easy way to come up with an action plan to get you towards your goal without having analysis by paralysis. Because you can do this pretty quick, either by yourself or with a group. And get yourself off the dime, moving towards where you want to be for you, your athletes, your coaches.
Okay, I'm fearful to ask, but is there any questions? The young man in the red hat. That was the best question of the day, thank you. Yeah. Sorry, did someone else have a question there? Did you go for it, yeah?
You said something about grants as applied to small business or profit business. Seems like a lot of the grants in this here are also non-profit. What about for-profit business? Small businesses?
Most of the ones I know of are actually for nonprofits. Quite frankly, I'd have to research that one.
Fortunately, you guys have less, there'll be some time before the next time starts, so should we go hang out?
So we've got the sponsorship handout here. We've got more of these if you want to doodle.
Cool, thanks folks, well I hope that was
Thank
helpful.
you.
Some practical takeaways for you.